ทัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมทัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมทัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Today at the monastery, somebody asked me what it means to be good, or to be a good person. And this is a very commonly asked question in Buddhism. And if you read the Buddhist teachings, the suttas, commentaries as well, the Buddha talks about goodness often. He talks about the difference between good and evil, or we say wholesome and unwholesome, in terms of our actions, our speech, our thoughts. It's a very central part of our teaching and practice. We talk a lot about making good karma and avoiding making bad karma. Doing good is usually defined as doing that which is for your benefit and happiness, and the benefit and happiness of others, or both. But even then, that's still fairly general description, and people have different ideas of what is beneficial or conducive to their happiness. One person's happiness is maybe not another person's happiness. So then we have other ways to narrow it down or define it better. So making wholesome karma or doing good in the Buddhist sense is cultivating the path, sila, samadhi, panya, that will help us to remove the causes of suffering from our mind, from our stream of consciousness. The causes of suffering are all our mental states rooted in greed, anger, delusion. Removing them is doing good, because you're removing the troublemakers from your life, removing the causes of suffering. So that's doing good. So any action that is helping remove greed, anger and delusion from your thinking, from your mental activity is good. And then cultivating the opposite, non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion. That's good. Or you could define it or refine it down to developing insight into the Four Noble Truths. That's doing good. Somebody who understands clearly the Four Noble Truths, you might say, is a good person. And that's one of the encouragements of the Buddha, is to find out, seek out people who understand the path to the end of suffering. They understand the Four Noble Truths, what we call Arya Pugalas, noble ones. They're of great benefit when we associate with wise, good people, and they have a good effect on us. Like in Thailand, when I first went to Thailand and I told someone I was going to stay with Ajahn Chah, there was a Thai man, he said, good, some of his goodness will rub off on you. They have the belief you go and stay with an enlightened teacher, then just being close to them, a little bit of their goodness will rub off on you. A bit like gold dust. If you meet someone who was solid gold, maybe a little bit of their gold will rub off on you, and you'll get some wealth. Here we're talking about spiritual wealth. But it just stands to reason, doesn't it? If you spend time with good people or noble ones, or at least people who have sila and are trying to practice what we call Kalyana janas, as opposed to Arya janas. There's Kalyana janas, people who are practicing on the path. They may not have realized the path, realized the Four Noble Truths yet, but they're on the path, they're practicing. If you spend time with them, then you'll get some good influences. Kalyanaja or Kalyana mittas, the people who only encourage you to do good, practice the path and do good things, and they don't encourage you to go in a different direction, the direction of evil or delusion, do things that will cause you more suffering or more suffering for others. So doing good and cultivating the qualities of a good person, meeting with other good people is a huge part of that. But meeting with other wise, good people, whether it's, if you are lucky enough to meet the Buddha or a noble one, or a good teacher, or Kalyana mitta, you also have to follow their example. And if somebody is a good teacher or Kalyana mitta, they are a good example, but then you have to recognize that and follow along. Try to emulate them, follow their advice, whatever advice they give you, listen to their teachings. You notice sometimes your mind is in the right state to listen to the teachings. Whether it's a recorded teaching or on YouTube or Zoom, or live teaching, you're with somebody who's a teacher and they give you advice or explanation of the Dhamma. Your state of mind is important, because sometimes your mind is not ready for the Dhamma and you reject it. Those mental defilements sometimes rear themselves up, and even though you're getting good advice or good explanation, your mind doesn't want to hear it. Maybe we're in a bad mood, so we don't accept the words, the good words that we're hearing. We reject them, or we're stubborn, or sometimes we're skeptical, and the doubt interrupts our ability to listen to the words and process them. Or sometimes we're just distracted. We're sleepy, or we're obsessed with something else. When you're angry, it's hard to listen to the Dhamma. When you're full of desire, sensual desire for something you want, maybe that takes over your mind and you can't listen to the Dhamma, even though the Dhamma may be good. Good examples, good teachings. But generally our aim in doing good and cultivating good qualities is to seek out good teachers, Kalyana mitta, but then to put their advice into practice. And we have to practice and cultivate the same qualities that we see in others, in ourselves, to improve ourselves and find this goodness, or cultivate this goodness, cultivate the path that leads us away from suffering to a place of peace, true happiness. You might say this, the real goodness that human beings can aspire to and cultivate, we're talking about spiritual goodness, spiritual qualities or inner qualities that come from Dhamma. Often people say, well, something is good because it makes me happy. But then often they're just referring to sensual happiness, material happiness. So if I have money, then I can buy things and get what I want, the things that make me happy. That's good, so money is good. But of course, a lot of the material happiness we have has its disadvantages. It can be cause for delusion, addiction, attachment. It's temporary in its nature, so then it's a cause for despair or disappointment when it runs out, when it finishes. So it's not what you'd call true happiness. It's happiness that's dependent on our external senses. We may say it's good, I like this, it's good for me because it makes me feel happy, feel excited, stimulated, interested, whatever. But if it's temporary, as all sensual happiness is, material happiness is all temporary, then it can't be truly good, because it doesn't last. But the kind of happiness that comes from practicing Dhamma is moving towards, you might say, permanent happiness, longer lasting, more deeply satisfying. You might say, a better kind of happiness. If you look at the bigger picture, like Buddhist cosmology, then we say, well, the human realm is a very good realm to be living in because you can develop the very highest happiness. You can cultivate the path all the way to nirvana, the end of suffering. But it's also mixed up with suffering. You have a human body, and you have aches and pains and illness, and you hear things that are not always pleasant, and you see things that are not always pleasant, smell things that are not always pleasant. So then we also have a hierarchy of happiness, and so we have Deva realms as well, the Deva Loka. So people who we say are good people, do good things and make good karma. When they die, they may be reborn in a heaven realm. And that's also good. But it's not yet the highest good, because even a Deva realm is temporary. Even if it lasts for a long, long time, much longer than a human lifespan, it's still temporary, it's not eternal, it's not forever. The highest realms are the Brahma realms. This word Brahma, one way of translating it means the best, the highest, the best. So in terms of realms of existence, the Brahma realms are the best. The people who attain the highest happiness of jhana through samadhi maybe are reborn in Brahma realms, where they have great blissful a long lifespan with blissful happiness for maybe millions of years. But it's still temporary. It's the best that's on offer in all the realms of existence is the best, but it's still temporary, it's still limited. Only Nibbana is beyond birth and death, outside of it. So that's the highest happiness. In Buddhism, we say Nippanang Paramang Sukhang. Nibbana is the highest happiness. So in terms of what is truly good, well, that which leads you on the path to Nibbana. So the Noble Eightfold Path, you say, is good. Cultivating that is doing good, the highest good for yourself and for others. And that's another part of it. And sometimes people who are new to Buddhism or not Buddhist, have other beliefs, other interests, they say Buddhism sounds quite selfish. Teaching people, even if it teaches people to do good, it's more just for their own personal happiness. So it's very kind of selfish, self-centered goodness and happiness. Nibbana is something that you just experience on your own, alone. So you're sort of tucked away enjoying your nibbana experience, but nobody else gets anything from that. So it's a very selfish teaching. Well, that's not how the Buddha described it. It's the highest benefit for all beings. The more people who attain nibbana, the better for everyone. Why would that be? Well, because somebody who is removing greed, anger and delusion from their mind will no longer hurt or harm other people. So who are the best people in the world? Well, the people who we call arahants, who've reached nibbana. They're the wisest people because they know how to do it. They know the way to nibbana, so they can give the best kind of advice to other people. When you make merit with an arahant, that merit is very powerful. When you help an arahant, it's powerful. When you listen to the Dhamma from an arahant, it's very powerful, transformative experience. If you're fortunate to hear Dhamma, so from somebody who's reached nibbana, so we believe Lumpocha reached nibbana, so you listen to his Dhamma or you read his books, it can really change your life. In one Dhamma talk is enough to do that. Open your mind, open the Dhamma eye, open your mind to seeing all kinds of things you didn't see before, clearing away delusion. So Nibbana is not at all selfish. It's the opposite. It's the most beneficial thing for all beings. And the more arahants we have in the world, the better the world will be, for sure. Because arahants don't do things from delusion, greed, anger and delusion, so they don't hurt other people and they don't lead human beings into wrong view or wrong action, harmful action. So you might say they're the best people to be around. They're the people that are truly good. So in Buddhism, when we say, what do you aspire, when you aspire to the good, what do you aspire to? You aspire to Nibbana, to cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path, which will bring you to the end of suffering, to Nibbana. It must be the highest good, the best good. The best of the best. There's many teachings the Buddha gave that help us to understand better what is doing good. So one very popular one that people love to recite is the Metta Sutta, Karaniya Metta Sutta. And we chant that in Pali regularly or in English. When you chant it in English, you say, this is what should be done by one who is wise and skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. It's interesting the Buddha began that teaching saying, this is what should be done. So again, this is a teaching from a wise, awakened being, the Buddha. He's giving you instructions. Yeah. The word is karaniya. Karaniya means an action to be done, something to be enacted. So if you work in a company or a job somewhere, you might get an instruction, this should be enacted, this should be done. Well, this is the Buddha's instruction to us, all beings, all people, this is what should be done for one who aspires to goodness. If you want to know what it is to be a good person or to cultivate goodness in your life, this is what should be done. And he goes on to explain many aspects of that in that particular teaching. And to be humble and not conceited. Humble and not conceited. Why did the Buddha encourage us to be humble and not conceited? Because if you're humble and not conceited, then you're opening your mind to the teachings. The opposite of humble and not conceited is proud, arrogant, big ego, where you're unable to receive any further explanation, teachings, advice, because you're proud and you're full of yourself. Very difficult to teach someone like that. And if you're coming from a starting point of being an unenlightened individual, you have to accept that, recognize that. You have to be humble. This is not a very fashionable way of speaking in the world, because the world, more and more, you have to promote yourself as somebody who knows, who is number one, the best. Whether you go for a job interview or further education, or just trying to make a name for yourself on social media, or whatever it may be. The way to go is to promote yourself. I can do it, I know, I'm the best. It's just cultural kind of conditioning. But it's maybe not the wisest when it comes to training this mind, because if you know, then you're not going to be interested to receive any fresh information, fresh teachings. And this is why when we come into a monastery, we bow to the Buddha statue. You're humbling yourself, you say, oh, the Buddha is a wise teacher, I want to learn. You're making yourself ready to learn when you're humble. In the old days, people would take their shoes off when they entered a monastery. Even when I first went to Thailand, went to Ajahn Chah's monastery, the very first time I went there, we walked there. We didn't go in a car, I walked there, 8 kilometers from Wat Nanachat. And we got to the monastery gate and we took our shoes off and carried them in. And the lay people would do that as well. Of course, nowadays everyone drives a car, so you drive your car to a temple, a monastery, you don't think of taking your shoes off. Hopefully you still do it when you walk into a building, into the meditation hall, you might still take your shoes off. But in the old days you actually took your shoes off at the gate of the monastery. Because it's a mental act as well as a physical act of removing your shoes. You're removing your ego. You're taking your ego out a little bit and saying, I'm ready to learn, I'm humble, I'm not conceited, I want to learn the Dhamma. So this is something that should be done by one who aspires to goodness. You have to be humble. And that doesn't mean to say you're putting yourself down. You may still have many skills and much knowledge, and you may have all kinds of good qualities already. But if you're aspiring to learn the Dhamma for Nibbana, then you're aspiring to the very highest. You have to accept, well, I haven't reached that yet. Or even if you have, you're still humble. If you ask monks like Ajahn Chah, he's obviously not here now, or Ajahn Mahabua, until a few years ago, he said, what does the Arahant do when they become enlightened? Is they bow to the Buddha, and they still remember the Buddha with gratitude as their teacher. So even if you reach Nibbana, it's not like there's no place left for humility. It's still there in your mind. You may have no more attachment to your 5 khandhas, no more delusion, but there's still humility there. It's just a natural spiritual quality that arises as one goes through the awakening process. So the Buddha encouraged us to cultivate goodwill, compassion, humility, being one who's easy to teach, contented, always complaining. It's another modern problem, isn't it? We're in a culture now that everyone complains, because if you think if you complain loud enough, you'll probably get something for it. If you shout loud enough, complain loud enough, you'll probably get somewhere, or you may be able to protect yourself, get the people off your back, get your boss away from you, or get some other person away from you if you complain, you shout loud enough, you protest enough. But the Buddha said that maybe that's not the best way to go. It doesn't mean to say you can never point out somebody's faults or something that's wrong with society, but we also have to learn contentment first. Because if your mind is constantly complaining, always seeking more, never satisfied, then it's very difficult to settle down and see the truth. So we also have to cultivate contentment, ease of mind. The mind is easy, the mind is willing to listen to teachings. Imagine if you're always complaining, the Buddha says something that you don't agree with and don't like, and straight away you're arguing with him. You're never going to get anywhere. And sometimes we do that. We may not be arguing with the Buddha because he's not here now, but you hear a teaching from the Buddha, you read it or you hear it, and maybe part of your mind does argue with it. So that's not fair, that's not right. We still have that part of our mind that doesn't accept the truth, doesn't accept the teachings, and we're not content yet. Not easy to teach. The very first time that Buddha gave this teaching, the Metta Sutta, to those monks who went out into the forest, and they went to a place the Buddha had said, this is a good place to practice. So trusting their teacher, they went there, but there were spirits, invisible beings in the forest who didn't want others coming in to their forest. I guess they're very attached to their place. So they made life difficult for the monks. The monks went there, set up their camp, started meditating. On the outside it seemed like a good place to practice, nice trees, nice atmosphere, but then they started having visions of corpses and the smell of rotting corpses, and horrible sounds, horrible smells, horrible visions. This was all coming from these spirits who lived there, who didn't want anyone else invading their forest. And they put the monks off. The monks were not yet enlightened, so they were shaken by the experience. It made them uneasy, agitated, worried, afraid. And some of them even became ill, especially if you have horrible smells of corpses and you're having nightmares, seeing dead bodies. Makes you ill. So they couldn't settle down in their meditation. They weren't peaceful, they couldn't meditate. So in the end they packed up and went back to the Buddha. And this happens sometimes. If you're monks, we do go out and we look at, and we camp in different forests, and sometimes you find a place that just doesn't seem very good, and you stay there not very long and you decide, this is not a good place, I don't want to stay here. Could be for any number of reasons. Could be because there's too much noise from people, or there's people around who are not supportive of what you're doing, or there's maybe dangerous animals, or could even be noxious plants, bad weather, or any number of reasons. But in this case the monks were plagued by nightmares and bad smells. So they went back to the Buddha and he saw them coming. He saw they're all ill, looking terrible. He knew they weren't peaceful. So he asked them how their meditation had went and why they came back so quickly. And they said, well, we just had nightmares and horrible smells of rotten corpses. And the Buddha said, oh, you need to go back. That's actually a good place for you to practice, because you'll make your minds very firm if you go back there, and you'll learn a lot of Dhamma. So they were humble enough to listen to the Buddha's advice and try a second time. But before they went, he gave them that teaching, the Metta Sutta. So this is what you have to do. You have to go back with an attitude of metta. You have to sit there and radiate thoughts of kindness, goodwill to all the beings in that forest. And that's become a kind of a standard practice as Buddhists, wherever you go, whether you're traveling on holiday or for work or to practice the Dhamma. You you take your metta with you. You get on a plane and you spread metta. You get in a car, you can have metta. You go to a new place, a new country, a new town, a new workplace, a new house. You spread metta. That's the standard Buddhist way of going into a new place, starting a new job, starting something new. You spread metta based on this teaching the Buddha gave to the monks. So he told them to go back and spread metta for all beings, for those born, meaning human beings and animals that they see, and those to be born, invisible beings, beings in all realms, in all directions, and the big and the small, and the people and beings of all shades and complexions, the happy ones, the unhappy ones, the good ones, the evil ones, whoever, whatever. Because when you practice metta, you're cultivating this ability to hold the thought of metta in your mind and spread it to yourself, and then in all directions, boundless, without limit, without preference, without bias. Those monks did that. They went back and they spread metta, and gradually the beings who are in the forest, these invisible beings, improved, stopped giving them nightmares and bad smells, and they started to have faith in the monks and the Buddha, and they improved. Because one of the ways metta works, this quality of loving kindness, goodwill, is not only drawing out the seeds and the goodness in your own heart, but it's also encouraging the goodness in other people's hearts, whether they're visible or invisible. Because every being in this world has the seeds of loving kindness there in their heart. It's just sometimes it's covered over because of people's suffering and their attachments. It's not always obvious. But when we practice metta, we cultivate the kind of qualities the Buddha was talking about in this sutta, it tends to have a good effect on the people around us. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's very subtle, but it helps other people to draw out their own goodwill. If you encounter people, even people who are very offensive or aggressive or unpleasant in their behavior, if you meet that with metta, it tends to calm them down and develop better relationships with them. So metta is synonymous with doing good. It's very much at the heart of doing good. It's not the highest good maybe. The highest good may be developing the insight into the impermanent, selfless nature even of the quality of metta. But it's still part of the path, and a very important part. This is why the Buddha encouraged us to meditate, cultivating metta every day. If only part of your meditation is spent cultivating the thought of kindness, goodwill. It's both cultivating goodwill and also preventing your mind falling into ill will, the opposite of metta, which we need to do all the time because we're constantly challenged in our life. Your life is not always a smooth ride. We have plenty of obstacles and things we have to encounter that might tempt us to become angry, irritated. So part of the reason for practicing metta regularly is to be prepared for those occasions, so that you don't so easily fall into negativity, self-aversion, aversion for others. Or if you do, you can return to the goodwill easier, quicker. You'll notice when you're practicing metta, then you're becoming much more of a Kalyana mitta to other people around you. Kalyana mitta, mitta means friendship, friendliness. If you cultivate goodwill, well, it will tend to draw that out in the people around you. It may take time, and that's often where we fall down. It's because we become impatient with difficult person or difficult situation and we lose our metta. But if you can have the patience and keep bringing up the goodwill, then that often will bring the goodwill up in other people as well. If you're more relaxed, more at ease in yourself, you're speaking in more positive ways, then that tends to bring out the same qualities in the people around you. If you take up this sutta, the Metta Sutta, and practice with the different words of advice, wise words and instructions from this sutta, ultimately brings you to experience states of samadhi. Practicing metta brings unification of mind, helps you to overcome the 5 hindrances, particularly anxiety, irritation. It can even push away sleepiness from your mind, because metta has the quality of brightening your mind, so sleepiness and dullness can be pushed away as metta becomes stronger. And you can become one-pointed on it, so you lose interest in all the distractions, the sensual desires that often block our mind from settling down in samadhi. And of course it counters ill will. So it can bring you to samadhi, practicing metta, and then cultivating the path. If you go through the words of that sutta, you go to the end, by not holding to fixed views. Fixed views mean views rooted in wrong views and delusion, and attaching to views with attachment, with a sense of self, clinging with a sense of self. Even a good view can become a cause of suffering when you cling to it with ignorance. But as you cultivate metta as a meditation object, you're loosening your mind up, developing mindfulness, and developing samadhi enough that your mind becomes able to contemplate things and see the suffering of attaching to fixed views. And they say the pure-hearted one is not born again into this world. So if you cultivate this all the way to its conclusion, then you may attain jhana, attain the anagami path, the path of a non-returner. In Buddhism we have non-returners, people who have attained the 3rd stage of enlightenment. They've let go of all attachment to their body. So they have no more anger, no more lust, because they're no longer attached to the body. The mind is as if in samadhi all the time. And they still have the subtle sense of self left, so they're not arahants, but they're anagamis. They're no longer born into the world as a human, they're reborn in the Brahma realms. And they become enlightened from those Brahma realms, what they call the Sudavasa realms. There's 5 of them. So if you want a sutta that will help you to understand what it means to be truly good and give you the pathway to that, well, this is a very good sutta to do that. Bring you all the way to the Brahma realms. And from the Brahma realms, anagami, it's only a small step to nibbana. So the cultivation of metta, goodwill, it's something the Buddha encouraged us to develop every day, whether as meditation or just in our skillful habits, helping others, helping ourselves. We have to know that balance as well, because it is easy to sometimes overdo it to the point where we're helping others and forgetting ourselves. So in any situation you always have to remember you're present as well as other people. It's easy to get burnt out helping others and neglecting our own health, our own mental well-being, our own needs. You have to set a little bit of energy and time aside for yourself, and that isn't being selfish. If it leads you to improve your own practice, your own state of mind, then you can go back and help others. Again, the non-Buddhists often accuse the Buddhists of being selfish, just meditating for your own well-being, you never help others. But it's a balance thing. As you practice cultivating this path, well, there'll be occasions when you can help others, but you can't neglect yourself. You notice if you're helping others all the time and your mind becomes very agitated because you're not getting enough rest, you're taking on other people's burdens, you worry about them, become afraid for them, your mind becomes agitated, those are the mental hindrances. Then you can't concentrate so well, you can't understand things so well, you don't think so clearly, your intelligence doesn't work so well. So just helping other people but without looking after yourself often becomes counterproductive. You can do less for them because your mind is not working so well. And maybe you're helping other people, you get to the point where you get really angry and then you actually take it out on others, or you take it out on yourself, become full of self-aversion or guilt. So we also need to balance our practice of metta between helping ourselves and helping others. They go together. And there may be times when you help other people and seem to neglect yourself, and there may be times where you seem to be helping yourself and neglecting others. But overall, your aim is to balance it according to what's appropriate, according to your situation in life. So if you're able to, maybe you go off on retreat or you become a monk or a nun. But if you have commitments, you have to look after a sick parent, or you have children, well, maybe it's not the time to go off ordained, but maybe you can go off on a retreat occasionally from time to time. You can do your own meditation retreat and then you go back and help those people. Depends on the situation. So the practice of metta is always supported by wisdom, understanding. In the end, we have to know for ourselves, don't we? We know our own mind, we know our own practice, what we're doing. Even though other people do give us advice, we have to know and take responsibility for ourselves. Because ultimately, nobody can do it for you. They can't do the practice for you. You have to do it. So you take on people's advice, and maybe it's good advice, but you still have to apply it to yourself, see what's really appropriate. And sometimes you're the only one who knows that. You're the only one who can answer that question, what the right thing to do is in any one situation. So maybe I'll leave you with those reflections tonight, and we can have time for some Q&A afterwards.